Thank you and welcome. I am Doris Wise Montrose, President of Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors. Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors was not established as an organization that commemorates the Holocaust per se. Rather, it was established because the children of those who survived and others should have a clear view of history and be able to read the writing on the wall. CJH insists that the last Holocaust imposes upon all people of goodwill a moral and political imperative to prevent the next one. In the 1930s, Jews in Europe were forbidden to attend schools, to play in the parks, to go shopping, and to do business. Jews accommodated them, believing that if only they abide by the rules, they will be left alone. But then the Jews were told to relinquish their possessions, their jewelry, and their arts. Yet again, Jews willfully believed that their possessions are only material objects, and if they only let go of them, they will be left alone. Then Jews were told they had to leave their homes and move into restricted areas or ghettos from which they were not allowed to leave. Then they were moved to work camps because, after all, Arbeit macht frei, work will make you free. And the Jews went believing that they will work for a while and then come back home. And then the stark reality started to sink in, and we know where that led to. In 1948, the UN completely disregarded the Balfour Declaration, the decisions of the League of Nations, and the historical rights of the Jewish people to Israel-Palestine. Instead, they unfairly split or partitioned the land of biblical Israel into a Jewish state and a Muslim Arab state. The Jews said, "It is not fair, but we will take what we can get." The Arabs said, "No, we want it all." Then the Arabs said, "We will rename ourselves, invent a people, a land, and a history where none had existed." The Jews failed to correct the myth, and now the world has sided against a people who hold an established history of a Jewish nation of over 3,000 years. Unfortunately, Israel and the Jewish people accommodated and continue to accommodate this new narrative upon which the world has heaped great support, along with much hatred toward the Jews and Israel. Added to this, in 2005, the then Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, decided that the Jews who had made their homes for years in Gush Katif were to be evacuated as a gesture of Israel's desire for peace with the Arabs, the first time in history that Jews evicted Jews from their homes. The Israelis went along to show the world their sincerity while ignoring the Hamas charter call for the destruction of Israel. And the Arabs reciprocated with their own destructive gesture by means of terror, launching thousands of missiles into Israel and its communities in the south. All of these ongoing gestures by Israel resulted in one failure after the other, yet many contemplate a recurrence of futile capitulation to gain world sympathy. Too many Jews still believe in the same old destructive narrative that the more we surrender to those who hate us, the greater the likelihood that peace with the Arabs will be achieved. Tonight, our guest presence will highlight our Jewish ties to Hebron, Judea, and Samaria as the cradle of our Jewish civilization. They will rebuke and explain the false and dangerous paradigm that by giving up our land, peace will follow. Our guest tonight will be introduced by Steve Goldberg, an active and passionate supporter of Israel and a strong Zionist. He is Vice President of Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors, National Vice Chairman of the Zionist Organization of America. He is a U.S. representative on the Executive Board of World Likud and was a delegate at the World Zionist Congress. He was also the lawyer for the Jewish Defense League for years. Steve has no family in Israel and has no direct ties to the Holocaust. Yet he understands well the significance of the existence of the Jewish state of Israel to Jews everywhere, and is a model for American Jews who should understand the historical precariousness of our survival. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Goldberg.
First, I want to thank Doris for hosting this event and all the events that she does host. She received some hate mail because of today's events, which only proves the point as to why it's necessary. Our guests tonight are among the best of us. There was an event in New York last night called the Hebron Flotilla, a boat ride around Manhattan. Carolyn Glick was one of the speakers, and she called the Jews of Hebron the North Star of our people. That is exactly accurate. Hebron is the second holiest city to our people. It is the place where our matriarchs and patriarchs are resting today. It were Jews who lived there for many, many centuries, were purged as the result of a pogrom in 1929. After the Six-Day War in 1967, a group of dedicated Jews decided to reclaim the liberated land in Hebron. There are approximately 800, surrounded by more than 100,000 Arabs who are trying to kill them. I try to go to Hebron whenever I'm in Israel. It is quite moving. The people who there live there, you go to their homes and you see bullet holes in virtually every one of their houses. You see bullet holes in virtually every one of their houses. They are sniped at. They're attacked. They are demonized by some Jews on the left. And they're there really standing up for all of us. If we give up Hebron, we might as well give up Tel Aviv. The two representatives here are David Wilder and Noam Arnon. They are outspoken in defense of the Jewish people everywhere, and particularly in Hebron. They'll tell you their personal stories and what it's like for the Jews to live there. With that, I introduce David and Noam.
Good evening. Shalom from Hebron. First of all, I have to thank Doris and Steve for setting this up. We very much appreciate it. And I also thank all of you for coming and giving us this opportunity to be here tonight and to speak with you. I think that before I begin, I have to make something very clear so that afterwards nobody says, well, if we'd known that, we wouldn't have come, because there are people that have problems with it. It's a confession, I guess. I really am a settler. I'm really a settler. You want to know something? I'm proud of it. But not only am I a settler, I'm also something that I've been accused of for years, and it's true. So I mean, you've got to come out and say it. People say that I'm an extremist. And I really am. But it's not my fault. It's in my genes. I inherited it from my great-great-granddaddy. I mean, look, what would happen if any one of you men went home, just on one day, you just go home and say, honey, we're leaving. And she says, why? And you say, well, I heard a voice. Somebody said, go. We're going. She says, okay, but where are we going to? I don't know, we're just going. And then you keep going and going and going until all of a sudden somebody says, stop. And that's what happened. And then when you get there, that's what happened about 4,000 years ago to a guy named Abraham. He heard a voice. He said to Sarah, let's go. And they went. And when they got to where they were going, I don't think there's extremism. It can't be any greater than that, because he tried to talk everybody out of bowing down to the sand and the moon and the stars and these, things made of wood. And he said, there's only one God. And everybody says, no, there's one there and there's one there. How much more extreme can you get? But that's what he did. And we're the sons of Abraham. We inherited that same extremism. Because when we try to tell people that Eretz Yisrael really belongs to the Jewish people, and everybody else says, no, it doesn't, and you've got to be pretty extreme to go against the entire world. When I take people on tours of Hebron, I start at a very, very important place. We start standing, looking at two walls and these beautiful, beautiful stone stairs that go up in between the walls. One of the walls is about 4,500 years old. It goes back to the days of Noah. The one on the other side, to the right of that, is only 3,700 years old. That goes back to the days of Abraham. But those stairs going up, also over 4,000 years old, reach one of the most important places there is in all of Israel. And whenever I take people there and we look, those stairs going up, I say, right up there on the street, that's one of the most important places there is anywhere in the world. There are no signs there, nobody pays any attention to it, but it really is. And they say, why? And I say, because, when we read in the Torah about how Avraham Avinu bought Ma'arat Machpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs, for 400 silver shekels, which was about $700,000. So it's written quite specifically where he signed the contract and put the money down on the table. It says twice, B'sharei ha'ir, at the gates of the city. The archaeologists believe that right where those stairs led up, going up, right in the street, if they dug down there, they'd find the gates to the city of Hebron. The same place that's mentioned in the Torah where Avraham Avinu bought almost 4,000 years ago Ma'arat Machpelah for the Jewish people. And think of it. Maybe that's where he stood. It's an amazing thought, but what's much more amazing than thinking and seeing Avraham Avinu, our patriarch Abraham, standing there 4,000 years ago, is the fact that we're still there today. How many people can say that? After 4,000 people, we're still there. And we're not just there showing people the archaeology, which is fascinating, but we're living there. We have families there. We have children there. We have tens and hundreds of thousands of tourists, Jews and non-Jews, that are there every year. It's alive. It's thriving. It's developing. It's growing. 4,000 years. That's where we started. That's our roots. And those roots are still growing today. Just down a little bit from those stairs, that's a long time ago, 4,000 years ago, but just down a little bit more, there are the remnants of a house that was built 2,700 years ago during the days of King Hezekiah. And when those excavations were done and they uncovered the pillars of this house, they found an amazing, just something that's difficult to even describe. They found seals in stone that looked like a bird or a beetle. Some of them have 2 wings, some of them have 4 wings. And on the top of the seal it has the word Lamelech, to the king, identifying the jars that these seals were on as property of the kingdom. And underneath the seal, in ancient Hebrew, the word Hebron, 2,700 years old, first temple. The archaeologists, when they found this, they said if anybody had any doubts as to whether this is the authentic biblical Hebron, those doubts have all been erased. They said Jews have lived here since the days of Abraham. If you want to talk about roots, very difficult to get close to those roots than right there. Ancient Hebron, modern Hebron. And then a little bit behind that, of course, there's also a very interesting character who lived about 3,000 years ago. Actually, he was so important, they named him after me. Because 3,000 years ago, after King Saul was killed in the war, and God said to David, go up into the hills of Judea, and David says, where? And God said, Hebron. So David came and lived in Hebron for 7.5 years before he went up and made Yerushalayim the eternal capital of the Jewish people. Let me say that again, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Yerushalayim. But he started in Hebron for 7.5 years, and there, the archaeologists think if they dug just up a little bit on the top of the tell, they would find not only the city of David, the first city of David, but they'd also find his palace. And today there we have a site which is called the tomb of Jesse and Ruth, Ishai and Ruth, David's father and his great-grandmother. This is Jewish history in the past, and it's alive today. All where it happened so many years ago. I could go into all of the history of Hebron, and we'd stay here for another week or so. I'm not going to do that. I want to jump a little bit, because there were Jews that lived continuously in Hebron, literally for hundreds, thousands of years, with very, very few exceptions. Until, of course, the riots and the massacre in Tarpat, 1929, incited by Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was a Nazi, which left 67 Jews dead, another 70 wounded. 3 days following those riots in August of 1929, the survivors were expelled by the British. Why were they expelled? A man I knew in Chicago who was a survivor of those riots. His father had wrote a letter to the British High Commissioner asking him why the people who had been attacked and massacred, why they were punished. Why did they throw them out? And his answer was very simple. He said, well, I just knew that there were more of them than there were of you. You couldn't continue to live together. It was easier to throw you out than to throw them out. And so for the first time in thousands of years, there were no Jews living in Hebron. But we came back to Hebron. We came back to Hebron, Baruch Hashem, in June of 1967. People started to come back and live in Hebron, 1968 for Passover. And then we came back to live in the city itself in 1979. In 1979, a group of about 10 women, 30 children, actually it wasn't 30, it was 40 children. They moved into a building which is today where I live, where Noam lives, called Beit Hadassah, a building that had been built back in the late 1800s. It had been a medical clinic for Jews and Arabs in Hebron until the riots in 1929. And they moved back in, all by themselves. For months they lived under siege. Nobody was allowed to come in. Anybody who left wasn't allowed to go back. And they, with tremendous Mesiut Nefesh, tremendous dedication, determination, stayed there, remained there until in the spring of 1980, another terrorist attack which left 6 men dead. Following that, the Israeli government finally gave authorization for the renewal of a Jewish community in Hebron. And I stress that word also, the renewal of a Jewish community in Hebron. Because when we came back in 1967 to Hebron, we did not conquer and occupy a foreign city. We came back home. We came back to where Jews had lived for hundreds and thousands of years until we were thrown out. And so we came back. And we've been living there ever since. Today, there are about 90 Jewish families in Hebron. There are over 300 children. There's Yeshivat Shavei Hebron in Beit Romano, which was built originally in the 1870s. They have about 300 yeshiva students there today. Altogether in the city, there are about 800 Jews. Just adjacent to us, Kiryat Arba, a community founded in 1971. Just 5 minutes out of the heart of the city of Hebron, the center of the Hebron. Today there are 7,500 people there. And there you have today banks and stores. People say, how do you live? Where do you go shopping? You've got grocery stores and supermarkets and banks and a medical clinic. Anything you need for your everyday life, you have 5-10 minutes from your home. My wife can call in an order and they bring it down to her. If she doesn't want to go stand online and lug the food herself or tell me to take it. So today, Baruch Hashem, we have a large, thriving community in Hebron and in Kiryat Arba. You know, earlier today, Noam and I were driving around this area. I really have never done that before. I hadn't been in LA for, 12, 13 years. And you know, I really felt at home. Like there were things that really reminded me of Hebron. Now those of you that know Hebron will say, what's this guy talking about? But almost everywhere you look, there were hills. And we took the car and went all the way up to the top. And you look from the top down, you get a beautiful view. But we've got hills in Hebron too. The Jewish community of Hebron is surrounded by hills. To the south, they're called Abu Snena. To the north, they're called Harat al-Sheikh. And when you look from all the way up there, looking down, you've also got a beautiful view. Of course, the problem today is that we're not up there. Our neighbors are up there. Our Arab neighbors have most of those hills. And back in 1997, when a guy then was Prime Minister, maybe you've heard of him, a guy named Netanyahu, he gave those hills, along with 75-80% of the city of Hebron, to the PA. To Arafat then. And I wonder what would happen here in California if some, radical terrorist organization said, they blackmailed, they started God forbid, it should never happen, terrorist attacks, and they said, we'll stop the terrorist attacks if you'll give us the hills. And the governor of California said, sure, why not? And they take the top of the hills, and then one day, one night, not one day, one night, all of a sudden, boom, 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 they start shooting at you from the hills. And everybody says, well, you have to show restraint. You got to give it time. That's what happened to us. Because when what we call the Oslo War, other people call it the Second Intifada, started at the end of September, beginning of October, the year 2000, the hills that we had given them became a source of shooting at the Jewish community of Hebron. And they shot at us for 2.5 years. Now I can tell you, because I've been up on both sides of the hills, going up in a very heavy vehicle, it takes between 5 to 10 minutes to get up to the top. Anybody who's a little bit younger in a uniform could probably run up there in about 5 minutes. So that 5 minutes just took 2.5 years until they finally went up and stopped the shooting. And people still today, they say, like, what did you do? Like, how did people live? So the one example that I like to give is when, I guess it was probably the spring of 2001, and I was working late one night in the office, which is just down the road from me, in one of the 4 neighborhoods, in the Avraham Avinu neighborhood. I got a phone call about 11 o'clock at night. My daughter, Aderet, called me on the phone. She must have been about 14 then, and she said, Abba, they're shooting at us. I said, yeah, I know, so what? I mean, they were shooting at us every night. We had sandbags in all the windows, and, so, okay. She says, no, but they shot into the house. So I ran home, and I found 5 holes in the wall, without exaggerating, that far from where 2 of my daughters had been standing. One of them who had just called me, Aderet. And, I had sandbags, but we left a little space for a little bit of sunlight, and the sniper picked it up and he shot through, and he missed them by that much. And so you ask yourself, this was a long time ago, and Baruch Hashem, everybody was okay. But you say to yourself, what happens? What happens to a 14-year-old who comes that close? What does she do when she's a little bit older and she can decide for herself where she's going to live? So I can tell you that my daughter Aderet today has 4 children, and she lives right across the hall from us in Beit Hadassah with her kids and her husband. In other words, she didn't say, it's too dangerous here, they almost killed me then. She said, I'm staying. And she stayed. And she's not the only one. I use that as an example because she's my daughter. But during that whole period of time when there was shooting, not one family left Hebron. And a lot of those kids who lived through that, and these are kids who all know somebody who's not around anymore, they want to stay in Hebron. They'll do anything they can. They'll stand on their heads to stay in Hebron. And today we don't have a whole lot of housing. All the apartments we have are full, and it's very difficult to get building permits or buy from the Arabs. If you try to buy a building from the Arabs, it works, but then they kill the Arab. According to PA law, an Arab who sells property to Jews to be summarily executed, they torture them, they kill them. There was an Arab, I guess about a year ago, who after a very, very lengthy one-day trial was sentenced to hang because he sold property to Jews up around Yerushalayim. So if you want to buy from an Arab, you've got to give him a suitcase with a lot of money in it, and then send him to LA, fast, because otherwise they catch him, you'll never see him again. But that's what happens. The kids want to stay with everything. And those that leave, they go because Hebron is too luxurious for them. They want to settle a hilltop someplace. They don't like apartments. They want to live in a caravan. They want to build their own house. That's the spirit. That's the spirit that comes out of Hebron. Because that's really the way it is. I mean, this is the way people live. This is the way people want to continue to live. And it's true. It's not always easy. I mean, the situation today is such that, as I said, it's very difficult for us to expand. We bought a building a few years ago for $1 million. A very righteous family in New York took everything they had and they bought a building. 40,000 square feet. very, very large building, 4 floors. We moved into it. We lived there for 20 months, and the government threw us out. Ehud Barak, the defense minister at the time. And it wasn't because they knew we didn't buy it. They knew we bought it. We have a film of the Arab counting the money. And, when the police interrogated him, they took the movie, because he of course said that he hadn't sold the place, because if he'd said he'd sold the place, they would have killed him. He started to change his story when the PA police caught him and took him to jail in Jericho. And then he started to tell stories. And so when he got back to Hebron, and the police investigating this Jewish occupation of this Arab house in Hebron, and we brought them the film, and they said to the Arab, "Isn't this you counting the money?" And he said, "Yes." So they said, "So what's the problem? You sold it to them, right?" And he said, "No, I changed my mind. I gave them money back." Right. You ever see somebody give $1 million back? But this is the way it works. So it's very difficult to... So after 20 months they threw us out. Today the Israeli prosecutor's office is suing us for $50,000 because they threw us out. It reminds you sort of like of a Chinese execution, when they shoot the guy and then they send the family the bill for the bullet. I mean, that's what they're saying. We threw you out, so now you have to pay for the expulsion. And now we're probably going to invest as much money as we did in buying the building in court, trying to get it back. Okay? And eventually, Bezrat Hashem, we will. But these are the kind of things you got to deal with. So, you ask yourselves, why bother? A few years ago on Hebron Independence Day, which is, the Liberation Day, the day after Yom Yerushalayim. We came back to Yerushalayim on Kafchet Iyar. We came back the next day to Hebron, 1967. And it's a happy day. We don't have big celebrations, but we do things. And a couple of years ago, a couple of Russian journalists caught me that day and interviewed me. And they asked me about all sorts of things. And at the end of the interview, they said to me, "Well, I guess you're not celebrating today." I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, you have this problem, and that problem, and that problem, and that problem. How can you be celebrating?" I said to them, "You guys don't understand it. You don't have it. You don't understand. You're right. There were a lot of issues. There's a lot of problems. But you know what? The Jews have had problems for 2,000 years. But you learn to overcome the problems. Sometimes you've got ups and sometimes you've got downs. But of course I'm going to celebrate today." And they said, "But why?" And I said, "Because I'm here. Because I live here. I'm here. I'm in Hebron." Many years ago we made a movie, and when one of the people who was interviewed, Rabbi Shalom Horowitz, who's an educator for, 40, 50 years, in the movie, I never forget it, he said, "When I was a child," he grew up in Brooklyn, growing up in the United States, who could ever have imagined visiting Hebron, praying in Marat HaMachpelah, davening in Hebron, teaching Torah in Hebron, learning Torah in Hebron? It was something you can even think. It was unimaginable. But we're there. We're here today. And as long as I'm there, I can celebrate. And that's what we do. We celebrate because we're there. And we have to make sure that never ever changes. The title of this tonight was, is Hebron an obstacle to peace? Or Hebron is the essence of peace. Because peace in Hebrew is shalom. Shalom is shleimut. It's completion. It's a unity. It's everything. Hebron is the roots of the Jewish people. If you chop off the roots of a tree, what happens to the tree? Think about it. We lost Hebron in 1929. In 1948, we lost Yerushalayim. We came back to Yerushalayim. The next day, we came back to Hebron. In 1997, we lost 75-80% of Hebron to the Arabs. What was the next thing they started to talk about? Yerushalayim. And it says in the Talmud that every day in Yerushalayim, before they started work in the morning in the Beit HaMikdash, they would send a priest up to the roof and said, "Is the sun yet risen? Even as far away as Hebron?" And if the answer was yes, they could start the work. And if the answer was no, they had to wait. In other words, if there's light in Hebron, there's light in Yerushalayim. If it's dark in Hebron, then it's dark in Yerushalayim. And that has a literal meaning and it has also a very symbolic meaning. And that's why we're there, and I can assure you that's why we're going to stay there. And our staying there with the hundreds of thousands of people who come to visit every year, and Bezrat Hashem, those who are going to, when things change a little bit, are going to come to live there, that's what's going to make the real peace. Because without that, there's nothing. I'm going to stop, and what we're going to do now is, the movie you're going to see is in Hollywood. I know we're very close to Hollywood. It's not Hollywood. I don't think it's not bad, but it's not real professional. But I think it'll give you an opportunity to see a little bit in vision, to see with your own two eyes a little bit about what I've been talking about, and then following that, Noam will speak. Thank you very much.
We've been involved with the Hebron for quite a number of years. Why the Hebron? There are a lot of causes, a lot of things that you put your time into. What's so special about Hebron?
To start with, it's here on the road. It's the Maras and Machpelah. That's a place where our forefathers are buried. And there's nothing holy to me than to be in a place that's holy like Hebron. There are other causes, but Hebron is number one. And the people of Hebron is what makes it.
What would you do if, tomorrow your son said, listen, I'm very nice to be here on the Hebron, and she got a problem, we're going to live here, we live in Hebron. What would you say to her?
I'd say to them, make sure you got room for more, because we're going to be coming right behind you. I look forward to that day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Heights
It's
are?
not the Heights. I've been here many times. My kids have all been here. My son was tenting it out last year. And of course, Lenny was hosting him for a meal. And this is just a phenomenal experience. It really is. The tenting with 60, 70-year-old ladies tenting out. That is an incredible thing to see. That's a nice man.
What does it say to you when you go to temple? You're crazy?
We told all our relatives. They looked at us and said nothing. And my aunt did tell her come up. And she wishes everybody would be just like us to do this, and she's not perfect. So that's a compliment.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
This Hebron gives not only us peace about what we're doing now, it gives the people who are there to know that people care, are thinking about them, constantly worrying about them, supporting them, and in any way possible can. They're the special people that keep everything straight alive.
Good evening, Erev Tov. Actually, this is Bet Hadassah, where I live, so we're in the right spot of the movie. And well, it was a long journey to come here, but I think it's very important to meet the people here, to know each other, and to know the truth. You know, somehow we feel like Noach. Today the world is covered with false information, with lies, and we are like in Noach Ark. We are trying to save the world and to save the truth in the world and to save the Jewish people and to save the heritage of mankind. Because this is about. When it was mentioned that not many years ago a new people came, a new people raised that never existed, like a Palestinian people, and they would claim for Palestine, and of course the Jews have no right to this land. Could you imagine only 100 years ago there was no Palestinians, there were no Palestinians, there was no Palestine. And Hebron was the cradle, was the beginning of the Jewish history, of the most deep Jewish heritage, the forefathers and foremothers. But it's not only the Jewish heritage, it's the place where freedom, where the truth was established by Abraham. He was the pillar of truth, of light to mankind. He was the first one to announce the faith, the emunah. So this is about Hebron. It's the beginning of the identity, of the Jewish identity, and of the identity of all the people who feel connection to this truth, to this light. When I came to Hebron as a young student, I was 18 years old. I came to Hebron and participated in this wonderful community which was there in Kiryat Arba. And Kiryat Arba is Hebron, and Hebron was born from the community of Kiryat Arba. And I was there studying in the yeshiva near in Kiryat Arba. Then the Yom Kippur War began, and we, as you know, the Hesder yeshiva students are also soldiers in the Israeli army. We were taken out from the synagogue, from the shul, from the Bet Midrash, out to the army, to the Sinai border, to the Sinai frontier, and then to the Golan frontier. And after a long service, and having, you know, we have lost friends there from our yeshiva, we returned. And now we began to be active in redeeming Hebron. My first project in Hebron was the excavation of the Avraham Avinu synagogue, the Avraham Avinu shul. In the center of the Jewish quarter of Hebron, there is a synagogue, there is a shul, Avraham Avinu. It was built 500 years ago. It was the center, the spiritual center of the Jewish community of Hebron. The JCC Hebron, you know, for many, many generations. But then after the pogrom, after the destruction of the Jewish community, the Arabs erased the shul, erased the synagogue and destroyed it. And above the ruins, the Arabs located donkeys and sheep's pen. And this is what we found in Hebron when we returned. And my first project was to excavate and to redeem the place. It was after the late Professor Tavger Zichrono Livracha began to dig in the place, and for his diggings he was arrested again and again by the Israeli police. but then we got the permission to dig it and to excavate, and I was in charge of those excavations. In 1976, we were digging there into the dirt, into the trash, and we found the remains of the shul. And today, Baruch Hashem, the synagogue of Avraham Avinu, Bet HaKnesset Avraham Avinu in Hebron, is active. It's a wonderful building. Well, the place was dead and buried. No one could ever believe that this place is going to live again. But the miracle happened. And the Bet HaKnesset Avraham Avinu is living again. It was mamash tchiyat hametim. You know, the place that was dead and buried is living again. Could you imagine? So this miracle did happen. And when today, every day when I go there, I feel this miracle happening again and again. And not only the building, but also, you know, the heart of this synagogue, the heart of the shul, is the Torah scrolls, the Sefer Torah, the ancient Torah scrolls, the ancient Sifrei Torah that had been there for hundreds of years, was saved in the pogrom of Hebron and were brought back into this location of the shul, of the Aron Kodesh of the shul. So this is one example. And you know, today many visitors come there to visit, including many officers in the Israeli army. And when I conclude my speech in the synagogue to those young soldiers and officers, I say, you know, Bet HaKnesset Avraham Avinu, the synagogue of Avraham Avinu in Hebron, it's only a microcosm of the whole state of Israel. Because what do we have here? A place that we had purchased, a place that was our homeland for many generations, and a place that we had been torn out by force. The place was destroyed, our homeland was destroyed, and then we returned, and then we redeemed the place, and then we build it again. So when you see the Avraham Avinu Shul in Hebron, you actually can understand, you see the whole story of the land of Israel, the whole story of the state of Israel. And this is what Hebron is about. But today when we face, you know, the false is all around us. A few days ago, UNESCO had declared Me'arat HaMachpelah as a Muslim mosque. Well, you know, the building over Me'arat HaMachpelah, the building that today you know, when we visited Me'arat HaMachpelah, this is a Jewish building. It was built 2,000 years ago by the Jewish people. You know, 2,000 years ago, there were no Muslims in the world. The Islam was created only 600 years later. When this building was built, no one could ever dream about Muslims. And the Jews built this building. It's the same design as the Temple Mount, as the Har HaBayit. It was built more than 2 million years ago. And this is the only building in the whole world that stands intact, complete, as a public building that's been used all those 2,000 years from the time of the Beit Sheni until today. It's a unique worldwide phenomenon. And this is a Jewish place. So how can they even try to think about the place as a Muslim mosque? You see, the truth is so clear. It's so obvious. The facts are right here. But still, we have to fight for truth. We have to fight for the just. This is what we do in Hebron. By being there, by praying, by davening there in Me'arat HaMachpelah, by bringing hundreds of thousands of Jews every year to Hebron. We fight for truth like Avraham Avinu did. He was alone, but he didn't break down. He didn't give up. He began and he continued his struggle for truth, and he began all the time. You know, he went through so many difficulties, so many obstacles, but he did it. This is the spirit that we have there in Hebron, to spread and to fight for truth. You know that every generation somebody wakes up. We say in the Seder Pesach, Bechol dor vador omdim alenu lechalutenu. Somebody who wants to destroy us. I will say that supposedly Hashem did that this sentence from the Agada shel Pesach should be truth every generation. So this is why every generation a new one wants to destroy us. Shebechol dor vador, unless we couldn't say this in the Agada shel Pesach. So Hashem takes care that this paragraph from the Agada will remain right every generation. So today, the struggle, the fight, is for truth, is for saying the truth, and not surrendering and not giving up the truth. And in Hebron, the truth is so clear. The two examples that I gave, Me'arat HaMachpelah, a Jewish place, a Jewish building, a Jewish shrine of memory, of heritage, that today somebody claims, you know, the Arabs build their minarets above the Jewish building in order to claim that it's a mosque. It's funny, but this is what they do. And you say, and now you see, UNESCO is declaring, wants to declare it as a mosque. The Avraham Avinu synagogue. The Arabs turned it into a sheep and donkeys pen. Now, the whole story of Hebron. The story of Hebron is a story of a Jewish community that was destroyed, was attacked, was massacred by Arab terrorists, led by the Mufti al-Husseini, which later on you know what party he was involved in the Holocaust. The Mufti al-Husseini, the founder of the Palestinian people. In 1941, he was in Berlin, sitting with Hitler, meeting Hitler, planning with him the final solution for the Jews. Himself was involved in killing about 500,000 Jews and preventing many others from being saved in Palestine, Israel. This is the story of the Mufti. Now then, in 1929, he was the leader of the terrorist movement of the Arabs in Eretz Israel. When their 70 Jews in Hebron had been tortured to death, killed, murdered, massacred, and burned and raped, and the rest were forced to leave the town. So this is the story of a Jewish community, of a holy Jewish community that was destroyed by terrorists, by pre-Nazi terrorists. Now what's more just than to bring back the Jews back to Hebron, to build again this community? What is more rightful? What is more just? I feel that Hebron is the most just and right idea in the world. But still we have to fight for truth. Again, when they all around declare the Jews of Hebron as settlers who penetrate into Palestine and destroy the place. Could you imagine? But yet, you know that when all around people try to attack someone, it means that this is something meaningful. This is something that all those around who try to attack him means that he has something to say. When all around, when the whole world, when huge budgets are being donated to those organizations who try to only to darken our faces, it means that they know that the truth is with us and they have to use all those huge budgets, and you can't even imagine how many organizations and dollars and millions of dollars are being spread all around only to darken our face. It means that they know that we have the idea, we have the truth, we have the light. They try to darken it. But as sons of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and as those who continue this idea of truth, of light, we know this is what we have to say, this is what we are going to say it. And Be'ezrat Hashem, you know, Avraham Avinu was alone, but his faith covered the whole world. We know that we have the light, we have the truth, we have this shlichut, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we are going to fulfill it. Now, of course, we should have help. We must have help. We must have your help, support, financially, politically, crying out and speaking out and fighting for the truth. And Be'ezrat Hashem, יהיה בסדר. בעזרת השם ננצח. תודה רבה.
Questions and answers. Anything people want to know about Hebron from me or for Noam? Please.
Well, what I'm going to ask, I'll look more negative, so I'll defend myself. My grandson was 3 years in mechanized unit defending Hebron. Now, really, you're here preaching to the converted mostly. Do you have, or do the people, the Jews of Hebron, have any sort of commitment from the NRP, from Shas, from the Likud, that they will not be treated exactly the same as the Jews in Gaza?
Well, I don't think there is any commitment. It's, the politicians, we don't trust them. The politicians were the same all the time. The only thing that we can do is to raise more and more support, and this is what we do, by bringing them to Hebron, about 600,000 or 700,000 Jews every year to come to Hebron to support and to be there, and to ensure that everybody knows that in Hebron Jews will never leave whatsoever in any condition, and there is no any possibility of expelling or uprooting Jews again from Hebron. It was enough after the pogrom in 1929. That's for sure. People feel connected to the place. And I want to tell us something more. Of course, we today proud Israeli citizens, and the most important thing is that not the British police is defending the Jews in Hebron, but the Israeli security force is what we are proud of. But the commitment to Hebron, to the idea of Hebron, is deeper and much more strong and much more, back in history than the existence of the state of Israel. Because Jews are connected to Hebron 4,000 years. So this is the real commitment, not from the politicians, but from the people.
Yes, please.
What's your name?
David Wilder.
When you introduce yourself, you said you might not like me because I'm a settler. I have all the respect for that. You might not like me because I'm an extremist. I have all the respect for this. I know what the settlers and the extremists do. However, when you were talking about uvda, facts, and mentioning that this is the fact, and Hebron is the fact, and the passport for Hebron is the fact, and that's true too. However, it's also a fact that you don't live in Eretz Israel, you live in Medinat Israel. And that's really like putting a knife in my heart. Because it was the soldiers of Israel that gave their blood to free Hebron in the 67 years. It was the soldiers of Israel and the state of Israel who pays also for the yeshivot, in addition to the money that comes from other places. And every time when people say to me they live in the land of Israel, well, it is a fact that it is the state of Israel, and I just can't see how this thing cannot be argued. Just help me.
Look, first of all, I agree with you. Of course, we do live in Medinat Yisrael, in the state of Israel. I have two sons that have gone through the army in combat units. Two of Noam's sons have also, one is still serving. I think that today the stress on the fact that it's Eretz Yisrael, as a term that we use very, very frequently, sometimes it's synonymous, but everybody, people, we know that Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, exists. There are a lot of people that don't know what Eretz Yisrael is. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's like talking about clouds in the sky. And we emphasize that over and over and over and over and over again. In other words, Hebron has not just been, as Noam just said, it's not a part of the Jewish people since 1948. You're going back to 1948 back then, and we stress that all the time. But I agree with you. None of us have any arguments with that. We're all citizens of the state of Israel. We all pay taxes, and we go into the army and have all of the other obligations that anybody else does. We hope and pray for the day that the state of Israel will accept and recognize and annex all of Judea and Samaria, not just Hebron, but all of Eretz Yisrael, and it should all be part of that. But I understand. Yes, sir.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I would like to know what the average Israeli citizen feels about Hebron and whether they feel a connection. And is it your belief or understanding that maybe they've changed and they're not so willing to give away places like Hebron and Judea and Samaria for some silly notion that they're going to get peace? I'm speaking for citizens of Israel, not people here like ourselves who share your view.
And of course you're right. I remember once that I visited here in LA some 10 years ago, and I was invited to speak in a school, a Jewish school, Jewish religious school in LA. I went into the classroom and I asked the children, well, who of you have been already to Hebron? Well, most of the children raised their hands here in LA. I'm sure I wouldn't get the same answer in a school, in a secular school in Israel. And this is a problem. This is the problem. When most of the people there don't know the history, don't learn the history, and somehow the way to their own history is being stopped. We have to remember the governments of Israel from the beginning. By the way, the lady that spoke now and left, I would like to tell her that Hebron was liberated in the 60 war without one shot. All the Arabs there, when they saw the first Israeli officer in Hebron, they gave up, they surrendered. And this officer happened to be the chief rabbi of the Israeli army, Rav Shlomo Golan. It was another miracle that happened there in Hebron. But then the government of Israel declared that they see these territories as payment for peace, not as ancient homeland that being liberated, but as play cards in this political game. So by declaring this, somehow we gave away our homeland. But here we face the fact that we have to bring more and more people to Hebron to show them. And I personally, I show Hebron to thousands of people every month, including many, many Israeli soldiers and officers. This is another project that we do to show Hebron and to guide them into the site of the place, the town, to many, many Israelis. And everyone see the facts, everyone see the history, understand what's the meaning. Now Hebron is not important only for us, the people who live there, because we can go and live in anywhere else. Hebron is essential for the very existence of the state of Israel. Because without this historical connection to the land, the state of Israel has no right to exist. People may ask why those Jews went into this Middle East amongst so many hundreds of millions of Muslims. What do they want in this area? Without this historical connection to the land, the state of Israel has not right to exist. And the historical pillar of the Jewish people there is beginning in Hebron. This is a fact. So by being there, we ensure the connection of the state of Israel to the land, to the history, to the right to exist. And we have, of course, we have to increase this act of bringing more people there. Not only Jews, not only religious and not only Jews, but many people, as many as we can. Of course, for this, we must have lots of budgets that we don't have yet, but maybe from this home, we'll have this opportunity.
I'll just add to what Noam just said. One of the major projects that we're working on today is exactly what you're speaking about. We want to get many more Israelis that haven't been in Hebron or haven't been in many, many years to get them in so that they see it. And Noam could tell you stories about the soldiers that he brings in, people that had never been in Hebron before, 18, 19, 20 years old officers that come in, and it literally changes their lives. I mean, all of a sudden they say, you know, and I remember many years ago, I was giving a tour to a couple of guys that had served in Hebron, and they brought in a young woman to show her around, and we were coming down from the tomb of Jesse and Ruth, and this, I don't know how old she was, maybe she was 19 years old. She turned to one of these guys and she said, "But this isn't what they told us. This, you know, we didn't learn that it was like this." You know, and this is what we have to bring to the Israeli public, and we're trying very hard to do that. Just for an example, a question is dealing with the Israeli Supreme Court. I mentioned when I spoke about the Beit HaShalom that they threw us out of. That was being heard in the Supreme Court. It's a case that at that time never should have reached the Supreme Court. It should have been heard in a lower court, but because it was Hebron, the Israeli Supreme Court was hearing it. And the president of the Supreme Court, I won't preface what I usually call her, because it's being recorded, and I've already been recorded calling another woman a witch this week, so we'll stop. But in any case, a woman named Dorit Bainish was hearing the case with two other male judges, one of whom was religious. In the middle of the case, she changed the panel. She threw out the two men, she brought in a woman who is more left-wing than she is, and the only Arab judge on the court. And they were the ones that were going to decide if we stayed there or not. In other words, if they could throw us out. The Israeli Supreme Court is extremely political. It's a major problem in Israel. Eventually that'll change. But today it's still a major issue. There are slight signs of improvement. First answer is very simple. When people ask me, they say, "What's your solution to the problem?" Okay, nobody's asked that here tonight. But one of the ways that that's going to change is when there aren't 6 million Jews in Israel. It's when there will be 12 million Jews in Israel. Okay, and then Jews will start to move into Hebron and to other places where today it's difficult to get to and nobody's going to be able to do anything. That's a necessity. The other second answer to your question is what I tell people when they ask me, like, how do you keep going? I mean, sometimes it's not easy. So I say to them, look, take a guy who's standing in 1944 in Auschwitz, and on one side is the barbed wire, and on the other side he sees the smoke coming out of the chimney. and somebody comes and pokes him on the shoulder, and he says, "Hey guy, don't despair. In 4 years, we're going to have a Jewish state, and all the Arab armies are going to attack us, and we're going to win." And this guy looks at him and says, "Buddy, you flipped out. There's no way. There's only one way out. Here's the wire, and there's the smoke. That's it." But it happened. 4 years later, 4 years after Auschwitz, we had a state, and all the Arab armies attacked us from all the sides, and we won. So what does that mean? That means that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Noam can only do, all of us that live there, and there's no difference between us. We're all the same. We can only do what we can do. We see as far as our nose goes. That's it. But there is a God in the heavens. And I don't know what He has planned. But it's happened. And it continues to happen. Okay? I mean, the story I told about my kids is a little one. I saw people bend over and have bullets go over their heads, and if they hadn't bent down at that very second, they would have been killed. I don't know what's going to happen in 5 minutes from now or tomorrow, the next day, next week. But I know that God didn't bring us back to Eretz Yisrael, and He didn't bring us back to Hebron to throw us out again. And I know that if we do what we have to do, then that day is going to come. That day is going to come when there aren't going to be 800 Jews in Hebron, there'll be 80,000 Jews in Hebron. And maybe it'll happen in my lifetime, and maybe I have my children, or my grandchildren, one of my grandkids in the movie. It doesn't make any difference. We're there, we're doing what we have to do. As we wrap up, there's one little thing left that Noah and I would like to do. There are two people who are responsible for setting this up tonight, Steve and Doris, and we'd just like to, first of all, thank you very much. Please.
I have a question.
You have a question?
Yeah.
Bakshan.
How do those of us who admire you, who think we're the same as you, we're your brothers, how do we support you? Whether it's financially, spiritually, morally, physically, what do we do?
Look, anybody that wants to help us financially, we don't say no. You can write a check to the Hebron Fund. It goes through our New York office. You get a tax-deductible receipt. And I know I mentioned some of the external forces we're working with. He talked about breaking the silence. There was a nice article in the LA Times a couple of days ago, glorifying them. They received last year $750,000 to work against us. They received it from the European Union, from the New Israel Fund, and a few other organizations like that. That's what we're up against. Okay, they have a lot of money. They have a lot more than we have. If people can help us financially, we'll thank you very much. You can exert a tremendous amount of political pressure. Today there's a new Congress coming in, and I've told everybody I've spoken to since the elections, make sure that the new people coming into office know what they have to know. I mean, you people did it. You changed the whole political side of the United States, so now we got to get these people to do what they have to do. And they have to put pressure on Obama, and that's something that people can do. And people have to come visit. They have to come to Israel. Steve comes all the time, and it's a pleasure. And we have other people here that come to Hebron. You've got to come to Israel. First, come to visit in Israel. Come to Hebron. Go up to Beit El. Go up to Elon Moreh. Go see the people that were thrown out of Gush Katif. Show people that you're there. It's very interesting. And you learn from that. You get a lot of tremendous uplifting because you see the people and you give some of yourselves to them also. And those are things that are very, very important to do.